That cow is worthless, they said, until the young woman from the ranch discovered the reason. Comment down below telling me what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story, and I want to get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. There are things we only understand when time demands its toll. I learned that on a Monday afternoon when I found the corral gate open and Breeze outside, standing by the edge of the creek like she was waiting for someone. My name is Sarah, 18 years old, hair tied back with a cotton bandana, hands rough from learning early that life on the Texas plains doesn't give you any breaks. Riverbend Ranch has been mine since my grandpa passed away. Small, struggling, sitting on the stretch where the river dries up first when the drought hits. Here in Dry Creek, everyone knows I shouldn't be running this place alone. But I am. And I don't plan on handing it over to anyone. Breeze was the cow nobody wanted. Skinny, gray, strangely quiet. She always stayed at the edge of the corral, near the creek that cut through the back of the property. The murmur of the water never stopped, not even on the hottest days. I was the only one who didn't turn my back on her. But I didn't know why yet. That morning, what caught my attention wasn't the animal. It was the boot prints in the damp mud, going back and forth toward the property of Richard, the wealthiest and most feared man in the county. I swallowed my suspicion. I closed the gate. I didn't say anything. Yet. I'm like that. Quiet like someone who learned early that speaking up costs dearly. My parents left when I was little. My dad for work far away. My mom to an illness that didn't even have a name on the certificate. Grandpa raised me. He taught me that stubborn silence is stronger than yelling. But I also carry a heavy shadow. Maybe everyone is right. Maybe I, just like Breeze, ain't worth the effort. By the second week, the drought truly announced its arrival. The creek dropped 1.5 feet in 3 days. The herd started showing signs of exhaustion. Martha, the oldest neighbor, hung an iron horseshoe over the barn door and prayed for rain. A tradition the elders never abandoned, even when they said it did no good. It was that week I noticed something impossible to ignore. Breeze wasn't weak. Breeze was different. While the other animals leaned against the feed trough with apathy, she circulated, sniffed around, and always returned to the same stretch of the creek. I started taking notes. On pieces of torn feed sacks, I wrote down the times, the behaviors, the little things nobody else looked at. The first turning point came when Andy, the vet hired by Richard to evaluate the region's livestock, visited the ranch and bluntly recommended that Breeze be sold before she weighed heavier on the pocket than on the pasture. I agreed outwardly but put off the decision. That night I found Breeze drinking from a specific spot in the creek, further down from the corral behind a thicket of mesquite bushes. The water there was cooler, cleaner. Someone had diverted part of the main flow, someone who knew that terrain well. By the third week, the smell of drought stuck in your throat. Emily, my cousin who came to help with the chores, started noticing that Richard was showing up at town meetings with a ready-made project. He wanted to buy the small ranches along the creek for a price he called generous. Matt, Martha's youngest son, whispered to me that this project had existed for over a year, but something had delayed it. The pressure cranked up when Jessica, the accountant at the co-op, warned me that the ranch's debt was due in 30 days. I felt the ground give way under my feet. 2 massive problems, no solution in sight. That was when the thing that changed everything happened, the thing I'll never forget for the rest of my life. On an afternoon when the sun was almost setting over the murky river, I saw Richard from afar, talking in low voices with Andy near the creek's diversion. He pointed at my ranch's land. I didn't hear the words, but I understood the gesture. They were measuring what wasn't theirs yet. I stepped back into the prickly pear cactuses and waited. When Richard left, I found a notebook dropped on the ground next to a rock. Inside, names, dates, and the scheme that diverted the creek water, specifically to weaken the livestock of the small ranches and force them to sell. But the notebook vanished the next morning, and I didn't know who took it. The 4th week was the cruelest. Richard made his move. He called a meeting with Sheriff Arthur, claiming I was disturbing the peace by hanging around his property line. With no proof, no notebook, and no witnesses willing to risk speaking up, I found myself alone in a room where Richard's words weighed more than the facts. Arthur ended the meeting without a conclusion, but the warning was clear. Rachel, the town schoolteacher and Martha's childhood friend, tried to cheer me up with a hug and a hot cup of coffee. But I cried for the first time. Not from weakness, from a rage that had nowhere to go. It was in that low point that Hank appeared. An old retired ranch hand. He'd been living in a weathered wooden cabin at the edge of town for years, ignored by everyone. He walked up to me at the general store and, without any intro, slid an old photo across the counter. A skinny gray cow, different from the others. He said that was Star, my grandma's cow. And then Hank told me what nobody else knew. Breeze was a direct descendant of the heritage Piney Woods cattle line, a historic breed of the plains, nearly extinct, famous for surviving droughts that would wipe out any other herd. Her instinct for locating underground water was real, documented, and rarely seen. The cow wasn't worthless. Breeze was worth everything, and Richard had known it for years. Hank had lived through the exact same injustice decades ago. His ranch was taken using the very same methods. He swore he'd never let it happen again. And now, finally, he had the chance to keep the promise he made to the land and to himself. By the 5th week, with Hank as my silent guide, I started rebuilding the evidence. Chloe, a clerk at the co-op whom Richard never took seriously because she was too young, had kept copies of the water diversion requests, technical documents Richard had signed proving the manipulation of the creek. But Richard found out I was investigating, and his response was immediate. He offered Jessica the full payment of my ranch's debt, in exchange for the transfer of the deed before the deadline. Jessica, whose family was struggling, hesitated. It was the most tense moment of the whole ordeal. The fate of the ranch depended on the decision of a woman I barely knew. Jessica didn't sign. But not out of conviction. Because Nick, a young lawyer fresh to town whom Martha had brought just for a visit, spotted the irregularity in the contract and blocked it for 48 hours. Just enough time. In the final week, Breeze did what no other animal did. She led our group to a forgotten natural spring behind the ranch. Clean, abundant water, exactly what the region needed. The news spread through town in hours. When Richard tried to hop in his truck to leave Dry Creek before things got worse, he found the road blocked. Martha, Emily, Matt, Rachel, Chloe, Andy, who finally picked a side, and over 30 townspeople were standing there. Not angry, but holding documents, holding testimonies. With the collective voice Richard always knew would be his downfall if they ever united. Sheriff Arthur didn't have a choice this time. The proof was undeniable. Richard was publicly held accountable and ordered by the co-op and the authorities to restitute the damages caused, working alongside the community to rebuild the irrigation system he himself had destroyed, under everyone's supervision. I stood in the exact same spot where I first found Breeze, by the edge of the creek. The water was running strong again. The sun was still scorching, but it felt different, with that late afternoon light that looks like spun gold on the plains. Hank sat next to me on a wooden fence post. We didn't say anything for a long time. Then, he pulled his straw cowboy hat down and asked, without looking at me, if I was going to need a hand running this ranch. I looked at Breeze, who was grazing peacefully like always, and smiled from the corner of my mouth, telling him I already had one. The ranch that wasn't worth a dime had become, in 6 weeks, the heart of a new community, and Breeze, the cow nobody wanted, was the reason everything survived. Because sometimes, what looks weak is just something that hasn't had the chance to show its strength yet. And out here on the plains, where the land teaches you that holding on is the greatest art form, I learned that nothing is worth more than what you decide to fight for, even when the whole world tells you it ain't worth a thing. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.